So hello, everybody, and welcome to Spiral Dynamics Integral Live. Today we have Darrel Gooden with us. He is going to be presenting a talk titled Exploring Assimilation Contrast Effect, Stratified Democracy, and Globalization. And he is going to explain the connection between the emergence of a new world order and the assimilation contrast effect, and how our perceptions of the new global order may be influenced by our existing beliefs and values. Darrel is a PhD who has worked closely for over 20 years with Dr. Beck and is a co-founder of the Center for Human Emergence movement. And Dr. Gooden has executed deep dive applications using the SDI methodologies within organizations large and small. He has a passion for large-scale change, working to transform institutions, industrial and commercial enterprises. And he's been mentored by Dr. Don Beck, and he lectures globally. So we're happy to have Darrel here with us. And Darrel,
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, you know, it came up, over a month or so ago that it would be good to have a conversation around assimilation contrast effect, which is a very abstract concept, as is many of Don Beck's concepts and ideas are. They're dense. I had a friend once tell me, I gave him the book on spiral dynamics. Actually, it was a woman, and she said, Darrel, this is really good. I'm sure there's something in here, but it's just, I just can't penetrate it. It's just too much. So this is one of those abstract concepts, but I know that this group is really insightful and capable. So I'm going to tee it up, but I'm going to rely on the community to make it a fruitful conversation. And with that, what I'd like to do, I'd like to start off, rather than trying to explain all of that Veronica said I would explain, I'm just going to do my best to frame it. And so one of the very first things I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video clip, and then I'll go into the presentation. I should be no more than 20 minutes if I get done what I would like to do. But anywhere, even in the 20 minutes, setup piece that I'm going to do for the rest of our conversation, if you have, a question, don't hesitate to interrupt. I'd much rather an exchange, and the presentation is just here to facilitate our conversation. So when the inspiration hits you, and you need to say something, raise your hand. And so just to do a little bit of housekeeping, how would when folks raise their hand, do you want me to recognize them, Veronica, or do you want to moderate that, or what?
So you want this to be interactive right off the bat. You're not going to explain certain things to us. And
I am going to explain certain things. I have a few slides I want to share, but even with that, I'm always open to letting the conversation flow
right. So usually we raise our little digital hand, and that way we get queued up digitally, and we know who's next to.
Okay. Can I ask you to do that moderation, and I'll just stay focused on the content?
Sure.
Okay? All right. Thanks. All right. With that, I'm going to play this clip first and then go into the slides. It might be about 6 minutes, but this is it captures the essential conversation around assimilation contrast. It's a clip. Oh, wait. It's a clip from a class, a lecture that Don Beck had done and conducted in Canada. So I'm trying to cut in at the right place here so we don't waste too much time.
That the problems of existence which
this?
we have created through our successes and our failures have outstripped our capacities to sort out our Rubik's Cube. And so I want to say as gently as I can that there are alternatives. I have for a half century been searching for them. I realize today is the 70th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. We are still not safe. Is it possible for humans. Are we bright enough? Are we clever enough? Are we courageous enough to say enough? Now, while you wouldn't expect someone from Texas to say things like that, and for you to listen, instead of poison, I introduced liberal intellectual ants into the population, eroding the ants' patriotism and causing them to question the authoritarian rule of the Queen. Slowly over generations, it weakens the ants' genetic resolve to the point where they stay in the nest at all times, watching television and writing letters to the editor. Beware of how we talk about change. Beware of political choices during presidential campaigns. Because what exists today is what I'm just about to demonstrate for you. I'm going to ask for volunteers in my typical volunteer fashion, if that's quite all right with everyone. Okay, I'll start with you two, you and you, if you'll come up here, right down here. I'm going to, yeah, no. Yeah. It's not time for women yet, is it? Okay, your line is destroy, destroy. Loud.
Destroy, destroy.
Okay, if you stay here, and then if you come over here. I want to separate you. Okay, now I need you, right? And I need you. All right. Okay, your line is my way, my way.
My way.
Louder, louder. You
My
mean
way, my way.
my way too.
My way, my way.
All right, okay, you over here, and you over here. I just want you to know how serious I am about all of this. Okay, I need you, and I need you. Yeah, come on, up, quick. We got right here. We got 45 minutes to save the world. So, okay, truth. Oh boy, that's good. All right. Okay, now I need you and that lady sitting next to you. You see, we've now crossed the gender line. All right. Okay. Make a deal, you two.
Make a deal.
Isn't that wonderful? All right, now I need you for sure. Yes, and I need, there's so many candidates for this one. And Adrian. Up here.
Where do we go?
Right here.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Come together.
Come together.
Yeah. Isn't this wonderful? Okay, will you come up for me? Yeah, you up here.
Okay, there we go.
Here's my good friend from LA who came down just to hear me speak. Yeah, right here.
Okay.
Okay, your line is help.
Help!
Okay, all right now. Everyone in full voice. I want to hear the orchestra. Loud. Okay, all right already. I just want to get you ready for 2012. Whether Fox Network or MSNBC, we hear these voices. Tower of Babel 2. Now, what do you think about these apparently
So that was I thought a good way to introduce the assimilation contrast effect, because it just sort of illustrated in acting out what the essential elements were. Any thoughts or reaction before I go to the slides? Okay.
Very, very effective. Very effective.
Yeah, it's I always was fascinated by that. Many of the times I had the opportunity to be a part of that. So can you see the slide? Is it up? Can
Yes.
you guys see this?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, so, I look at this as sort of a lab of a kind. We're going to talk about assimilation contrast and stratified democracy and just what impacts, and insights we can gain from those constructs as we contemplate and just live in the world and deal. And if you read various things, I read the Foreign Affairs magazine, so I'm not a geopolitical consultant. I'm more or less what you would call an enthusiast, I guess. The word was used earlier. And I'm fascinated by these things. And part of my fascination comes from the fact that in the realm of spiral dynamics integral, I've had the occasion to bounce around the world and see and talk to different people about those things. And so I think people care. Certainly we do in this salon, we do. So with that,
Darrel, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. We see the presenter view, so we see like the next slide and all of that.
Okay.
Ra-
Oh,
rather-
you know what? It's because I have, oh, okay. Let me see. Hold on. All right. I'll have to unplug. I have a large screen. I think that's probably why. Thank you. Let me stop sharing and share again. And let me know if that's better. 1 second. What do you see now?
You should click below on the screen icon. Below, go down. No.
It's good now, I think. We see a full screen.
Oh, you did? Okay. Okay, let's see. Hold on.
Yeah, click
Is
it.
it full screen? Full screen yet?
Yes, that's fine.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I had my large screen plugged in, so but anyway, okay, so this you guys can see. Thank you for that. So essentially the idea behind it is, in our efforts to grow and learn, it's a fact that our cultural DNA is really what, as you guys know, I'm preaching to the choir here, helps us to shape the humankind and the trajectory we might be on, and different people are at different places and stages along the spiral. But in many regards, the living conditions and the leaders we elect really does shape the body politic. And furthermore, and maybe not a subject in this instance, but also creates those religious systems that people feel so tied to, as well as political systems. So I see them sort of as systems that help control the cognitive map that people are engaged in. And so this is a slide I took out of one of Don's decks, and this is the basic assimilation contrast slide where it relates, besides those ways of being and expressing themselves. You can see the flamethrowers, which were the guys on the ends, the extreme ends, yelling "destroy, destroy." Obviously, we could say very much a red, egocentric kind of a manifestation of behavior. And then as you get a little bit softer, the zealots, which tends to represent a more blue-red kind of a way of being and expressing oneself, where they're saying, my way, right? And then you have the folks, the idealists or ideologues who basically are true believers who are just saying, just do the basic truth. Now, notice the pyramid is that those two extremes on the left and the right are very much at odds, but they probably respect one another more in some instances than they would respect folks up the same trajectory. You know, all the left-leaning practitioners, politicians, and constituents, you know, representing that whole left side, from the conciliators to the pragmatists to the moderates, basically are, how do you say, they're in the same camp, but there are instances where the lower left, L6, would respect more the lower right, R5, before they would look at the conciliators in their own party or in their own way of being as true believers. So they would see the conciliators as turncoats, so to speak, you know, people who are not really with them and worse than the adversary, or in some ways, and folks talk about it, enemies, although that would be, I think, the wrong term. But as you go up, you know, the moderates are, you know, the folks saying, you know, make a deal. After some people are just saying truth, you know, the ideologues. The moderates will go, okay, you know, let's get together, and right on up to where folks who at the top of it, the pyramid there, will sort of, if they're effective, they find ways and means to have the extreme parts of their party kind of go to the side for a second, let some of the adults or more reasonable people get together and do something vis-a-vis some kind of compromise, discussion, dialogue, something along that line. So that was always something that I thought was very useful and instructive, and it made a lot of sense to me. And then when you apply the spiral dynamics color scheme to it, it just made a lot of sense to me. And so that's really the essential elements of the assimilation contrast. And then, you know, in Don's dissertation, where he did an analysis of the situation building up to the Civil War, in his treatment of that, these were the things, the definitions that help one understand what these frames of references are all about. And the anchorages are sort of those things at the extremes. They said, this is really nailing in what it means to be a Republican, what it means to be a Democrat, or what it means to be a social democrat, and so on. And then the latitudes of acceptances, if you were to assess any person or group, if you will, you say the center is, you know, this is where I am. And the latitude of acceptances, to what degree would that person, who being who they are, having their life experiences and all that they've gone through, will tend to look at the more liberal side of things and go, okay, well, I can get all the way over to the folks who are the ideologue, but when you give me those flamethrowers and zealots, I just can't deal with them. So they would have that leaning to go that far. And then on the conservative side, wherever that person may reside, they can say to themselves, well, you know, the zealot Bob Smith is, you know, he makes a lot of sense. So while they're centered in a way of being and thinking and behaving in and of themselves, the latitude of acceptance is, they tend to lean a little bit more right than left, but they have a lot of acceptance of left. Now, you have some folks who you could imagine, and granted, this is not a scientific talk. This is just me expressing my enthusiastic observation of things. You could have a person whose latitude of acceptance is very tight, okay, where they see themselves dead center, and they can go a little bit to the left to the conciliators on the liberal side, and they can go a little bit to the right to the conciliators on the right side. And that's a tight, you know, fit there. But to the degree that your latitude is wide or narrow is the idea behind this. And in every instance, there is ego involvement from the perspective of the person, right? And the perspective of that person in terms of the reference group, the Democrats or Republicans in the United States. And I know in other countries, there's legitimately multi-party democracies out there. But what makes sense is, to the degree your reference group is bought into either robust communications or buying into various conspiracies that may be floating around in the echo chamber they may happen to be involved with. And it all matters because that ear gate, eye gate, matters as what you hear regularly, and all those biases kick in and so on and so forth. And what additionally, if you are having lack of communication, belief in conspiracy theories of various kinds, and then stereotypical kinds of ways of thinking about the other side, and even thinking about folks in your own persuasion who are just not on board properly. And so those three elements, the lack of communications, the promulgation of conspiracy, belief in various conspiracy, and the stereotyping other folks, this is the kinds of things that is allowed to build. And pretty soon, what was once just a different American talking about the situation, and I'm just speaking from my perch here and knowing what the politics are around here, you move from saying, well, we just think differently, to where it's adversarial, and to where, this is just downright demonizing. And to the degree the anchors pull apart the body politic, so to speak, it brings about real conflict. And conflict not necessarily resolved in a constructive way. It's set up to be a much more destructive interaction. Okay. And I don't want to read this eye chart, but what I wanted to point out on this chart, another lift out of Don's work, is essentially the center, the core of where the world had been in 2012. Now, I know that there's a lot of research going on in South Africa, for instance. There's several people that Rika and her work in universities down there have a number of PhD students who are publishing in spiral dynamics and integral theory kinds of things. But what I'll call your attention to is to the right side there, where there is this distribution, if you will, of the various memes throughout the world. And you could see where in the Western Europe, Germany, Norway, Switzerland, there are in certain areas in Canada and the United States, back then it was professed about 3% of the population was there. If you fast forward Laloux's book, I think he would have bumped those numbers up quite a bit, So he may have more current information with his treatment, and his book was very popular, I know, in Europe. But this is as of 2012, research that had been done up to that point suggests this. So now, as we move up the spiral, when I say we, I mean societies, there may be, on these numbers here, may have been bumped up. But I think the general trend would hold, right? And in terms, this is a slide originally done by Elza Malouf and Dr. Beck in their work in Palestine. And I sort of retreated it a bit. But basically what you can see now, like, again, it's not a scientific treatment. This is an assertion from my own observation and reading and staying abreast of various news cycles. And you can see here where there are those communities, societies, Somalia, Taliban, certain areas in South America. As you go across, what I'll do is call your attention to the large sand chart thing, right? And the idea behind it is this communicates to us that a large part of the world is still steeped in some combination of authoritarian democracy, exploitive empires, or tribal orders. And I know in my work, I did a few presentations in South Africa. I never really per se worked there as a consultant, but I visited a couple of companies and talked to a few folks who were involved with spiral dynamics. And they explained to me how important tribal communications and rituals are to the community there. And when I say that, what I mean to point out is that the bulk of the community in the society, as well as reflected in the government, has this need to resonate with those tribal orders. For instance, you could have a very, Don would often tell a story of one of his colleagues who had a PhD from Harvard or somewhere and was working back home in Johannesburg and bought a new house. and buying a new house, she explained she was going to kill the goat and do a celebration. Now, being an educated woman and everything, you would think these rituals had no meaning, but in fact, they were still very meaningful to the community. And even in the work that goes on with consultants, I know over there, before they do a whole lot of anything, they go to the people and connect with that community vis-a-vis a tribal experience, working in mines and all of that. So very much in other parts of the world, there's a lot of red and purple still in play, and they tend to support exploitive empires. You think about over the years, how the United States has partnered with various dictators from here to there, and it's just a fact that some of those dictators are very exploitive in their ways of leading their societies. Nevertheless, the idea is if that society is residing at the core of that society's V-beings or residing in a purple-red space, they respond to a purple-red leader. Now, whether that leader becomes a benevolent dictator is another issue, but that is what's manifested. And then the authoritarian democracies. Now, and we use this word democracy, sort of just to explain government, I guess, and I don't want to, because in the United States, we always consider ourselves a democracy. Technically, we're a republic, right? But it's an election, there are elections and so on and so forth. So that's, I wanted to point that out. But the authoritarian democracies, I just sort of categorically looked at what Dr. Beck and Elza originally had was Cuba in there. But I thought, well, China these days and Russia these days is really, I could have put Turkey in here as well, right? They're authoritarian in their manifest leadership and governance. And then the multi-party democracies, although the United States only has 2 parties, where Singapore, Japan, United Kingdom have multiple parties, more of that multi-party democracy. And then we go along the spectrum and you'll see manifest in Western Europe and in the Scandinavian countries a much more egalitarian political system. And oh, by the way, I think they have the higher percentage of women in their various leadership bodies, and a number of women prime ministers and presidents and things of this nature. You see a lot more of that in the Scandinavian countries in Western Europe. And then I took a shot, right, wrong, or indifferent, at saying, well, if there's anything like a stratified democracy, which is sort of a bit more complex and capable of dealing with more, I think the emergence of the BRICS, and I could have even put in here the European Union, and then NATO is just, even though it's a military kind of orientation, but in terms of governance, it feels and looks like on the surface to me something of a stratified democracy. Now, is it integrative? Not so certain if it's so integrated or flex flow oriented as it could be, but the mere fact that there are several different kinds of governing entities involved with it makes me think that way. Okay. And at the top there, we know, you move from developing these 4th world or 3rd world, or however you want to call it. Those are the communities for which a great majority of the world still resides. So question, where would you guys put India? I didn't think about it, but where would India fall on this today? Any suggestions, any ideas?
I think India is pretty blue-orange, leaning toward with Modi, semi-unhealthy.
Yeah, Modi tends to be authoritative, wouldn't you say? I think.
Exactly. Authoritarian democracy, much more than multi-party, because it just it doesn't give enough space to minority in order for this to be multi-party.
Right. Now,
I think there's a lot of V memes coexisting in India, because you're going to find a lot of realities and difference in poverty and wealth levels there than you may find in other countries. So there's a wide range of V meme expressions there, I think.
Do you think on par is when compared to the United States or Canada or Europe, you think there's even more diversity there than in, for instance, Europe?
And more inequality?
More inequality.
Yeah, I mean, in the United States, there's more inequality than one would expect if you're from Europe. People are surprised that, they think the United States is a wealthy country, but people don't know how much true inequality there is and how much poverty concentration there is. So that's true. In India, I would say the inequality, I don't know for sure. I'm not an expert on this, but I have been to India. I think that it could be said that there's even larger concentrations of poverty because you have these huge slum areas surrounding big cities like New Delhi. And so the United States doesn't quite go as far as slums, even though you do have some very poverty-stricken neighborhoods.
Yeah, and what's sort of counterintuitive is as you get a healthy orange, even, right? I think and I stripped out of this any references to economics because I kind of wanted to just do a political kind of a conversation, but it's hard to pull apart the economics that underlies some of the stratified democracies, entities, if you will. And for instance, as you exit the orange meme as a society, let's say you had a healthy blue experience, rules are in place, the rule of law dictated how folks behave, there's no kings, there's no oligarchy. But what really tends to happen is as you go through the orange meme experience and successes manifested throughout the society, the power and the wealth will tend to concentrate, which will exacerbate that difference in living. The lived experience in the United States, like whoever was pointing out the fact that there is a large disparity in wealth, where the 1% has like 90% of assets, and what is sort of explained by certain folks is that is the nature of capital or capitalism. So, one of the things that really intrigued me was the whole China experience with what they call this social, what do they call it? Social capital, I think, and where they're trying their best to balance those aspects of socialism with capitalism. Those manifested, like recently, she has come down hard on all the technologists, on all the entrepreneurs, as if to say, well, we've got enough of this wealth, and seem to be on purpose, very explicitly rebalancing their equation. Now, whether or not he's successful in that, we'll see. But anyway, I thought that was a interesting thing, that as you go and exit the experience of the success value system, the strategic enterprise, if you will tend to make the wealth gap worse.
Before you go on, Darrell, I want to make a comment on India and China. There's also the corruption issue in India. Some friends who moved back to India and took their 2 teenage American raised kids with them. And the first thing that they were absolutely horrified by is that you had to bribe somebody to get your phone installed. And
that was just
that kind of street level corruption. And in the US, it's not that the corruption isn't there. It's that the corruption is at a large corporate scale, right? Here. And then I was looking for some statistics on wealth distribution, and I found a really interesting one. I'll see if I can post it on the website, that says that China is number 2 behind the US in number of people, of citizens with wealth of over 50 million. Wow. Number 2 behind the US. So China has the same income inequality problems that the US does, and that was fairly recent data.
Right, and what's interesting, Barbara, about that is that when you acknowledge that and you see the ideological leaning that China is now manifesting in their decision-making apparatus, where they're, Jack Ma disappeared for 6 months, or something like that. And he's not the only entrepreneur who had amassed a lot of wealth. And the other thing is, oh, by the way, there's this a big conversation right now around BRICS and the setting up of a whole different reserve currency or basket of currencies, if you will. You pull the string on that a little bit more, and you'll find, and I have friends who are consultants in China. Well, they're now back in the United States, but I have a buddy who consulted in China for 30 years, helped set up the legal system in many ways, involving corporate strategies and things of this nature. And I remember 5 or 6 years ago, him explaining to me, yes, you have these multimillionaires, as Barb outlines, and that they may even have amassed as much as $50 million personal wealth. Here's the trick, the challenge. In the United States, you have that kind of money, you could go anywhere you want in the world, no problem. And you leave your assets intact, whether you have them in the Cayman Islands or you have them in the United States or someplace, Isle of Man or whatever. But you're free to flow and go here, there, and everywhere. In China, these millionaires are bound to keep their monies in the country. And so the risk, if they were to actually attempt to really make the yuan a alternative reserve currency, the flight of capital out of China would be so massive, it'd be like an instant collapse, because while they have amassed a lot of wealth, they know they're bound to keep that wealth within China. Now, they may travel and go around the world themselves and go have all the experiences that any other rich person would have, but they can never move their wealth out of the country as freely as other parts of the world. And that's one challenge. Now, I don't know if Brazil and South Africa, who's the other members of the BRICS, and now I understand they've allowed Saudi Arabia and Iran and Turkey as well is playing around with dealing with that. And the idea being, well, we have been in this world order since the end of the World War II, where the United States sort of dictates through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank what is proper behavior for a country. Thus, we've sanctioned this one, we've sanctioned that one, we've sanctioned this one, and the recent manifestation after the Ukrainian war, in that they even went so far as to make sure Russia was iced out of the transactions from bank to bank. And so this is sort of spooked a lot of countries. And now that many countries are catching up to the United States in terms of GDP and all of these indicators, they're scratching their heads thinking about it. All right, but it's not as easy as it might seem and you hear in the news. Any other thoughts on this? Okay. So there's a few roles, and you could read them here, that folks will take on in working the political systems. The idea about integrated evolutionists is sort of along the lines of the flex flow thinking, where we know we have serious problems, and to the degree we have this, that, or the other consortiums. I see lots of blocks of consortiums coming together, whether it's NAFTA or any other kind of group that gets together just for the sake of making tighter integrations, whether it's supply chain or whether it's just exchange of ideas. There are roles that folks take on that you could pretty much surmise that they would either manifest in one way or the other as primarily being a pragmatic thinker, making sure the society is engaged and all boats are being lifted. I mean, Brazil went through something like that, I think, with the last 10, 12 years ago, when the guy who's currently the president now first got in, he lifted so many people out of poverty. And China itself has lifted a lot of people out of poverty. That's why it's not such an absolutistic point of view to say all authoritarians are wrong. It's just you either have a despot or authoritarian kind of a manifestation or some kind of form of democracy / republic. So I was going to touch upon the 12 postulates. I don't want to go far into it, but the idea behind it is these are the elements that one should consider when constructing some kind of solution. So it's one thing to admire the problem. I always say, let's not just admire the problem. Now, we in our group on Saturday mornings, you know, we have, instead of 45 minutes to solve the world problems, we allow ourselves 2 hours, right? And so I'm under no illusion to think that we're going to solve anything, but hopefully in this conversation, you know, we get a little more insight into not just the causalities, but the potential solutions to some of the things. And so the 12 postulates are put forward as ways of thinking about how, when you're going to speculate, let's say you have a nonprofit, or I work with a lot of governments, municipal governments, and I just recently was doing some work in the state of California. And so in governments, I get it. I know how to work in that realm. In the private sector, it's a little bit different, but nonetheless, you want to reframe things as much as possible. I'm a fan of reframing. The whole reason I think I was attracted to spiral dynamics was the ability to reframe a problem from simply black and white to a different way of looking at the world, and issues around value systems and the codes therein, and dealing with behavioral stereotypes. When you get a chance to reframe it with a different language, it really helps. And then the whole idea behind creating vital signs monitoring these days, with the emergence of data analytics, you know, to do predictive, prescriptive, and types of analysis, is really a robust thing right now. So back 12 years ago, 10 years ago, it was conversation. Today, the tools are plentiful to help put data in play, to help glean insights from what's happening in a particular area. And then I am a fan of focusing on the future. I mean, I just think wherever you are and you think about the future, if you project yourself 10, 12 years, 15 years into the future, turn around and look and say, well, how is it today and how do we want to be in the future? So I've done a lot of work in strategy, and I think strategy lends itself to that. But if your strategy, your policies, and your structures are all intact, the reason I think spiral dynamics integral is important, because it touches upon the cultural aspects. And you could deal with structure, and you could deal with systems, and you could put the strategy in place, but if the culture is not resonating with that, it's like, it just won't end up where it needs to be. And the idea of identifying a superordinate goal helps to align those intelligences so that the culture actually has an authentic resonance with where the leaders are professing to take them. And in terms of, global leadership, having a superordinate goal, like right now, the closest thing I think we have to superordinate goal is in the United Nations, I think it's 15 sustainability goals or something like that. And I think that's the kind of superordinate goals that helps to transcend and help folks to think about the future. I just saw a story where some law was passed in United Nations International Court, I guess, apparatus, that was put forward by the tiny little small island nations, because they are on the very tip of the effects of global warming, in that their whole entire island may soon be underwater. And they were successful in making the whole world take note and take responsibility for that. Now, they decided, that's one thing. The decision was made to, yes, we will have these governing laws in place to make sure we are adhering to the more useful policies when it comes to global warming. Now, whether or not, having made that decision, those are actually enacted, we'll see. And then the stages, steps, and waves, which sort of is in many ways the idea behind the integral theory, are ways and means of looking at it. And if you were going to do assessments of different kinds of vital signs monitoring, you would want to in some way acknowledge and recognize those kinds of things. And then mobilize resource. Yes.
I just read something really interesting. I'll see if I can find this survey that in the US, the plight of the bottom 60-70% economically has become so precarious. A few years ago, people were willing to spend a few dollars a month to work on global warming across the board, right? Mm-hmm. And now it's like I don't have $1 a month to spend on global warming. I can't even rent my apartment, right? And so all those goals that the UN has come up with are rich person goals, right?
That's true. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, yeah, some people don't have enough to pay attention.
Yeah, and I mean, I hear that from friends who have family back in Mexico. You know, I mean, their family in Mexico just thinks we are utterly nuts on thinking about anything but feeding our own kids.
That's a real problem. That was why I was so impressed that this little island nation was able to push through such a piece of legislation, if you will, call it that, in the United Nations.
Well,
But
well,
it's one thing.
it's a
Yeah.
very green thing, right? So the power group likes that, right? It sounds really good, especially since they also know that we might not actually have to do anything about it.
Yeah, that's why I said they make these decisions, but now whether or not they take action is a whole nother thing. I think even the Paris Accords, everybody was on board until they were not on board, or until they didn't really do anything for it, you know? So it's one thing to decide, it's a whole nother problem to actually implement, right? So yeah, that's yeah. And then if your living conditions are such that I cannot pay attention to what global warming is doing, because I just have too many alligators right in front of me that I have to beat down before I can try to go and save the coastal line, even though certain minds in play think that, well, that's good for you right now, but in 25 years, you're going to really take note of it. So wherever you fall on the spectrum of believability in terms of the global warming, whether you fall down and say, well, I think the preponderance of the science suggests that definitely it's a problem, as opposed to, well, I'm informed by certain other things that tell me we're on a 10,000 year cycle, and this is just the earth going through its normal cyclic thing. Okay. That's the conversation that's at hand. And I myself, I guess, fall down on leaning more towards what I read and hear as the preponderance of evidence. Now, how urgent the problem is, or whether or not the problem was caused by man, or whether or not the problem is a result of the normal 10,000 year cycle, I don't know. But I would say the problem does seem to be happening. Now, whether the cause is one thing or the other, it's a different conversation. But no.
And I'll have to say, some of my neighbors would say, oh, we entirely believe in global warming. We just had a week of 80-degree weather, unheard of in this part of the country, right? But so what? I can't feed my kids. I can't afford shoes for my kids right now. So, don't talk to me about what's going to happen in 25 years.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a challenge. I mean, I just had a couple more slides and then I'll be done. What time is it? I just want to do a time check.
10 o'clock.
Okay. I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna end with this slide here, and my presentation will be available. I'll send it to Veronica. I sort of took one opportunity. I mentioned we can outline the problem, frame it, talk about it, and I am a fan of like I said earlier, trying to come up with solutions. And so one of the things I took a look at when I did a presentation in South Africa was, what is the right mechanism to help Africa and this various countries? There's a ton of countries there, right? But in South Africa, it tends to be an anchor. A lot of immigrants were in South Africa from other parts of Africa. It's much like in the United States, we're going through in some parts of Europe, lots of influx of immigrants. Well, in South Africa, there's a ton of immigrants coming from all over Africa because they believe that in South Africa, there are jobs and opportunities for them. And so one of the things I started talking with folks both there and in Ghana was in terms of, them setting up and helping to encourage the young entrepreneurs to make a difference. And one of the things I see with this is I have my own way of looking at it, the mimetic scheme, as I call it, but it's nothing more than just an overlay of what the integral is, right? The mindset, the behaviors, the culture, the systems must be addressed in the 5 deep. And Ben was very involved with the 5 deep methodology. And so I'm of the mind that the 5 deep integral solution space is the kind of thing that in any solution a community, a person, a company brings forward, you know, you want to be able to take action. You know, you want to address those systems and structures that need to be put in place. This is a holistic kind of thought about it. And in terms of Africa, how is the Pan-African worldview to be influenced? You know, how to shape that worldview so that the biases and all the other things, so we avoid that assimilation contrast issue of believing in the wrong conspiracy theory, you know, or miscommunicating or misinforming yourselves and others and so on and so forth. All those things come into play with shaping that worldview. You know, we call in business development shaping the environment. So the environment needs to be shaped, which is to try to influence the cognitive map of the community there. And how does the current indigenous values operate? You know, you have to do a real world assessment of and get an understanding and have a dialogue, a deep dialogue around the issues of what the living conditions are. So you can't go much further without acknowledging that. Anyway, I'll leave it there and then let the floor open. Hopefully that tees it up properly enough so that we could have another hour or so of conversation. So that sort of sums up my presentation to get our conversation going. And with that, I think the floor is open.
Darrel, did you say that you're going to send Veronica or
Yes.
some of us your slides? Okay.
Yeah, I'll send the whole slide. There's 5 or 6 more slides after the one I just showed, but I just took those 5 points and you know, did more on those. But yes, that's pretty much it. I'll send that to Veronica, free to share with everybody.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Darrel. That was super interesting.
So I guess we can go around the horn and just see, I mean, you know, my fascination these days, like I said, I am fascinated with this topic. I do more work with companies and organizations, not so much with governments, although a lot of my work is in the government space. But the agencies I work with are not the political agencies per se. They are the functionaries, you know, implementing HR or ERP or something like that. But I am curious as to, I mean, here's one question. I mean, do you guys believe that the BRICS, the evolution of BRICS coming online is a real threat to the United States? I tend to not think that way. But if you listen to the popular news, I mean, you go to Fox, you go to MSNBC, I listen to the BBC. There is a lot in the media about the emergence of the BRICS. Do you guys see that as a threat to Western society? I don't myself. Paul?
You know, I guess I would, it's going to sound like a squishy answer, but I would say pay attention to whose perspective it's being addressed from. You know, Western society, the US, that's an incredibly broad brush.
Mm-hmm.
And is it a threat to Western society? No, I would agree with you. Is it a threat to certain details of the Western society's economic and authority structures? You bet it is. You know, and so but it's also, there's an inevitability about it. I mean, if we think we can escape you know, any empire or dominant society can escape the cycles of history. I mean, we're just,
yeah.
I mean, you just can't do it.
Well, you know,
Empires fall.
Yeah, there's another story developing which suggests that for the last 80 years, the world order has pretty much been dictated by the United States, and that we're now entering a phase where that's no longer going to be the case. Is that good or bad? I happen to think the rest of the world catching up to the United States is a good thing, but everybody is not as open to that as I am. I mean, what's your guys' hit on that? Is it good that, you know, the world order that has been in place for the last 80 years, which has been pretty much sort of centered around the United States being the one superpower for a period of time, 50, 60 years of that was two bipolar type thing, Russia and the United States. But with the emergence of China now, it's a rebalancing of the equation, right? Good or bad. You know, I look at the media and think all you hear is how bad it is. But is there any goodness in that? I mean, what do you guys think?
I'm not sure that's the right frame to be looking at it, because as they say, good, bad, who knows? But one thing's for sure is that the US dominance globally is waning. There's no doubt about that. As other energies and politics are increasing. So the global currency, I believe, is the linchpin to the whole thing. The US being the less and less of the global fiat currencies. And that, to me, Darrel, is what's going to tip the economic usefulness of the United States, because as less and less countries hold US dollar reserves, as the US dollar global currency wanes, the more that's going to come back to the US. And with the US's incredibly ridiculous national debt in the trillions, that's going to basically collapse the society financially. And that's part of what this great reset is all about. That's my 2 cents.
Any other thoughts on the Great Reset?
Yes, I would maybe reframe, as you like, reframe the question. Let's say since the Second World War, the US control or dominate the world by, if I look at it from spiral dynamic perspective, did the domination of the US help to solve the world environment conditions? Did the experiment of dominate the world by democracy in the past 70, 80 years was successful? And I can definitely see some positive aspects that happened past years. But definitely in the last 20 years, we can see that the democracies around the world, the Western democracy and US at the head of them, are not capable of solving the world challenges. So the question I would ask is what would be the right leadership or the right system to solve the world problems today? And definitely US democracy cannot solve it. We know that.
Great.
Let's raise our hands. Sorry, because Brandon's been waiting. So Darrel's kind of asking questions and people are just jumping in, which is fine. But since there are people waiting in the queue, let's try to do it that way. So did you want to respond to that, Darrel, or should we go on to Brandon?
No, I was just going to say that was a great reframing. I appreciate, as I've heard the making that comment. I completely resonate with that. But go ahead, Veronica.
I'll let Brandon go and then I'll cue myself. Go ahead, Brandon. Brandon, are you there?
Might be on mute.
We don't hear you, Brandon. We don't hear you. Hey, okay, he says he might be having audio problems. So you want to check back in a moment, Brandon, and we'll let Barb go ahead. Okay, Barb.
I guess I tend to think, like Ben, that it's the economic rather than the democracy, and in some cases just the big stick bully that the US has used. You know, who knows if some of these fledgling democracies would have taken off had not the US thought that they were a little too socialist, so they would back some sort of a monster dictator in that area, right? I mean, and one begins to wonder where the strategy is. You know, we see all the NGOs with a nominally green strategy worldwide, right? And yet, in fact, governmentally, you know, we see the big stick, not just militarily, but also economically, to the point where sanctions knowingly applied when in fact they couldn't possibly have any way of changing the outcome. It has become a real problem. I mean, if I were the BRICS, I'd sure as heck be looking for an alternate way to do trade, so that the US didn't drop me off the international monetary systems whenever I did or said something that annoyed them. And so it seems as if that's a logical course of action for other countries to take, even EU maybe. But then one asks, you know, there's really two Americas, right? There's Main Street, which is the bottom, right? I think now almost 90% of the population who has basically no assets, and then the upper 1% or so that has managed to accumulate them. So we have to ask, is it good or bad? For whom, right? If it pushes a collapse, as has been reasonably suggested, are we going to again see the billionaires are bailed out and the rest of us are all sleeping in our cars under a bridge? I don't know. But I think that those are questions that we need to ask about Americans' democracy. It's obviously not working. You know, Brandon put it at a 7. I would have put it much lower than that in a functional way, right? We have elections, we change leaders, but nothing changes for the better on Main Street.
Well, there's a school of thought out there that really, now this is maybe counterintuitive, but and I can't remember the book, but I'll try to send some information on it. But basically, a school of thought out there that basically looks at the demographics of the various countries. For instance, China, who just had this tremendous rise in the last 25 years, was a result of the working age population entering the prime, you know, so to speak. I mean, they had a large number of young people entering the workplace 20 years ago, and then for the last 20 years have been responsible for the tremendous growth in their society, lifting a whole lot of people out of poverty. Well, now, due in large part to the one-child policy, which is a policy, right? And they are now trying to quickly reverse that to even allowing more than 2 kids even, because they now perceive the fact that in another 10 years, they're not going to be as dynamic an economy as they once were. And in fact, given the land distribution and the age of our population, this is really the century for the United States. And there's a school of thought that, you know, China will not necessarily fully implode, but they will not be the dynamic economy they've been for the last 20 years, simply because they don't immigrate. They don't have immigration coming in, even though a lot of folks in the hinterland goes into the urban areas. Still, the population age distribution is such that the United States is better situated in the next century, with the only rival maybe being Mexico, who's very similar. And it's just a thought. I mean, you know, that the demographics also play a role in it, you know.
Brandon?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yep, it's working
Oh,
now.
awesome. So basically, I was kind of thinking of case studies from the 20th century where various nations have lost their global hegemonic status. In particular, I was thinking of the United Kingdom and Japan. And in my mind, the loss of that global hegemonic status is not necessarily always a bad thing for the citizens living in those countries. Because what you have to keep in mind is that there are huge costs to maintaining that infrastructure. I'm sure everyone here knows that the US spends, I think it's around $800 billion a year maintaining a global military empire. And that's money that could be invested internally in the country to address some of the internal problems we're having, such as like our very thin social safety net that's causing some other social problems.
That's a good thought, Brandon. And did you want to respond to that, Darrell? If not, I'll jump in.
No, go ahead, Ron. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's see. I'm not even sure what I'm about to say. I'm not an economist, and I think we live in a very complex system that with so many moving parts that it's very hard to comment on anything that's happening. As someone who's both American and European, who has lived in 2 continents for part of her life, I can see how, the strengths and the weaknesses of the United States, the entrepreneurial spirit of the United States has given birth to so many great ideas, so many companies, so much innovation. And I think that has benefited the world greatly. And I know that even a generation ago, you couldn't buy Heinz ketchup here in Spain, and now you can. And my mom lives in Pittsburgh. Heinz used to be first a local company, then a national, and now it's a international. So you can buy Heinz ketchup just about anywhere. The United States still is managing to have the most powerful global companies based and headquartered in the United States. But as you said, that's changing. So TikTok came out of China, and there's probably going to be more cases like that in the future. I really don't know what that means for the world, but I know that I feel that this is an inflection point right now in terms of human consciousness. I've said this before, and I'm speaking from a more spiritual, energetic perspective, but I think part of the second tier is realizing everything from a more energetic perspective and realizing the other levels of functioning that happen at the human level and outgrowing these nationalistic tendencies that we have. So comparing, is the United States doing better or worse? Is this good for the world or not? And as the world progresses, we will go towards an ever more globalized world, whatever problems and solutions that may bring. I don't know. It's bringing out a lot of fear right now because there's a lot of fear about global control, about people, about powerlessness, loss of autonomy. But on the other hand, there are problems that can only be solved through global dialogue and cooperation. So how do we solve these things? I don't know. I think that the best economies or countries, whatever that might be in the future, I don't know how these collectives are going to be defined in the future. But I think that the more transparent and porous and collaborative that they are, and I'm not even going to call it democracy because democracy is one step in evolution, but there are many types of democracy, and I think some work better than others. But how well we are able to be collaborative and transparent and to allow entrepreneurship while being conscious of the environmental impacts of those economic ideas that are birthed. So I don't know if that made any sense, but
we're just having a conversation. I think, it's just a sense you get as an individual of what's going on, and kicking it around just helps. I think in the sense of if there's not full clarity, there is a willingness to seek to understand. And no, I think those are good thoughts. You want to have Sophia?
Hello, yes, thank you. Thank you, Darrell. It was a really interesting and thought-provoking presentation, and thank you, Veronica. I put my hand up because I agree, support, resonate with what you were saying, that we are, I feel like I'm being called on to look upon the thing through a lens of a spiritual, energetic dynamic, because in my work as a somatic coach, there's a physical, there's an emotional, there's a mental, and there's an energetic. And working with the energetics kind of opens up this space of, I'm not an economist either, or articulate about political systems as much as I read about them and I have a personal understanding. But so I left Barcelona in September, where I lived for 10 years, and so was pretty aware from an international, within the international community, of what was happening, of the blue-orange transit. Since I've been in the UK, I've lived in about 7 different locations, and what I see here, 7 or 8, I don't know, I lost count. What I see here is, although the attitude towards the government, and I know what you're talking about is governance and sort of top down, and obviously it is a huge influence, but I'm seeing so much from grassroots coming up. I think it was Barbara mentioned, you know, what's happening in community and people coming together, and bugger the government, we're not going to concern ourselves about, we're going to get on with living and life, and how these are strengthening in community. And I think that in a way, sorry if I'm not so coherent about this, but that in a way is the foundations that are forming a new level of cohesion in society that manages the transitions. So what I didn't see in the presentation, and what sometimes confuses me and stops me from contributing in spiral dynamics, is because there's very sort of defined colors. And for me, there's a very thin line of blue and orange, because the space between this transition is much bigger. And what that takes, and there's so many crossovers of different levels in, you know, and you talk about Indian society and the multitude of different dimensions that people live within, crossover from one to the other. I don't know if I'm making any sense now, but just from my personal life over the last 7 months of moving around so much, my whole spiral goes through, you know, I'm dominant, I peak in any one of the 7 or 8 memes every day, you know, about how I'm responding or reacting, or shutting down, or being triggered or inspired. And I think that's happening in a way that transitions are what are shaping.
Oh, I agree completely, Sophia. The transition factors are, I think, the most dynamic in the theory of spiral dynamics. When you transition from one value system to another, therein is a lot of energy, just a lot, because the influx of one and the inflow of another, you know, so ebb and flow going on all at the same time. So no, it makes a lot of sense to me.
And the communications that are going on between there, and, you know, the inclusion, the whole way that people are trying to frame communication to keep things together, to create more cohesion consciously and otherwise.
And when you think about the cacophony of noise we heard at the introduction piece I played from Don, all of them are shouting this at the top of their lungs with these several different perspectives: destroy, make a deal, you know, truth, just give me the truth. So everybody's got a piece of it, right? Which is why I think you know, methodologies, frameworks like spiral dynamics help us to step away and reframe, just for the sake of getting a little bit more clarity. Paul?
Thanks.
Thank you, Sophie. Paul, you're on. Oh.
Yeah, I think part of the thing here also is, and I'll go back to some of the questions you asked earlier, and I think Veronica touched on it too. You know, is it good, or is it good that the American hegemony is in decline? And I guess maybe that one way to answer that indirectly is it good that the Roman Empire declined or ended? And, or even more recent, is it good or is it bad that the British Empire declined? And I think, you know, you do need to kind of look at the two poles, the good and the bad, but also ultimately, I think it gets bigger than that. And you really have to look at what happened when the Roman Empire ended? What happened to when the British Empire came to an end? And really, how did that affect the elites? How did that affect the existing power structures? But also, maybe more importantly, how did it affect the average citizen? You know, and I think if you look at that, take that kind of a perspective, you maybe have a better shot at getting a deeper understanding of it. Because, I mean, this often feels like the parable of the Chinese farmer. You know, it's like, oh, somebody stole your horse. That's terrible. Well, yes, but, and then it's a back and forth. You know, this event kicked off next event, and that was good, but that kicked off another event which was bad. I mean, there's this, whenever you get into this multiplicity of factors, you're going to be in this endless parable of the Chinese farmer. And how do you sort that out? That's I think the challenge that, if you will, call it the integral community is doing and is here to part of what function we serve to the world.
Thanks, Bruce. Paul. So, Bruce, I was wondering, I haven't heard from Bruce. Do you have any thoughts, Bruce? Any comments?
Not at this point. Well, I'll just quickly say it's all very complicated. I don't have answers here in this 2-hour session. I think it's very difficult to make sense of, I can actually show my face too. I think it's very difficult to make sense of the information we're getting to know what's true or not true, which makes it hard to know what steps need to be taken. And I think that's all I'll say at this point. If I can think of more to say, I will share it.
No, you know, it's like I thank you, Bruce. No, it's like what my buddy who, the woman who I shared the Spartadynamics book with, she just said it's just way too dense, you know, and oftentimes in practice, you know, I mean, I remember oftentimes we will take the insights of Spartadynamics into an organization to do a change management program, and what I found was you had to utilize the insights from Spartadynamics as a framework to simply help you understand the dynamics in an organization and what's going on. You know, you could do assessments for structure, for systems and all of that. But I always kind of approach it, and Don Beck would affirm this thought, that it is, you go in as a change agent informed by these kinds of thinking, understanding that there are not types of people, these are the living conditions folks are experiencing, and you know, values are manifested based on their own life experience. And then when they interact with other folks, you know, it's the same. I appreciate what you're saying. And you know, it's the assimilation contrast effect. You know, when I look at it in the United States and you hear the different sides talking about things, they're talking past one another. And for instance, Safir, am I saying your name correct? In Israel right now, there's a big challenge right now. I understand with a challenge that we're hearing in the news over here, that there is a change about in the judiciary over there, which is one of the main bodies helping to make policies in Israel. Can you talk about that? I mean, in terms of, is that a good thing as from the perch you sit on for the society there? Does it make sense that they do judicial reform? Because all we get is a surface treatment here in the United States, and I guess in the news in general. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, what happened in Israel right now, it's a peak of conflict that started from day one or before the country was established. And it's a conflict between, you may say, between the blue Jewish reddish to the democratic orange green. And basically the new government is based on a lot of right-wing and religious parties. And they are really changing the basic of the relationship in the democracy between the separation of the bodies. And until now, or let's say in the past years, the court developed to be very strong in Israel, where in some way in some laws that the parliament tried to legislate, the Supreme Court have more power than the government, and every time they try to regulate a role that is against human rights or against equality, so the court can delete it. So of course, the people, the side of the political maps that affect from this, there are the religious, which are trying to establish Jewish country where Jewish have more rights than other people, and the right where they want to create a more a less democratic country, a more authoritarian democracy. So the new government established 3 weeks ago, and the first thing they do is trying to make laws that destroy completely the power of the Supreme Court. First of all, we choose the judges. The government will choose the judges. Second of all, if the judges will decide to delete laws, we have more powers from them, and we can still go on with the law. So this is like completely not separations of powers anymore, and it's going to be very much like Poland or like Hungary. And what more sad about it, it's that those are religious power, which are when we can start to make laws without any limitation, they just make Israel occupation more and more aggressive, racist, and no chance for peace. And this, of course, will affect the economies, affect the human rights, and so it's going to be very tragic for the orange and green values in the country, and Israel is going to become much more reddish blue.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. Josh?
Oops. Yeah, hey, I've been listening. I've just been doing some home repair stuff. Yeah, the comment I would have, I appreciated the presentation and all the components there. The mention of American hegemony, and I started as a radical, and I still am mostly a left-wing radical, but the whole thing is, yeah, America is the evil empire. We need to stop them. And, part of me still kind of thinks that, and I think there's evidence towards that. I think in terms of politically versus, say, economically or whatever, if the US is no longer the world superpower, which may happen, and maybe I'd support it, is it simply that nothing will fill the vacuum? So a question that has been asked, and maybe from blue-orange folks, but I still think it hasn't quite been answered, is like, if the US steps aside, are you just setting it up for, say, China? Now, you mentioned that China economically might be declining, but that doesn't necessarily mean other things. Russia, I don't know who else would step in. It seems unlikely that the rest of the world would be like, okay, cool. Let's all just step back. It's like, oh, sweet, let's step in for something else. And then I like the point that Brandon made about, well, sometimes the no longer being superpower is better for the citizens. I mean, Japanese citizens, in terms of measure of quality of life and economics, have been doing pretty damn well after they gave up imperialism. Germany, I guess you could say that too, probably. And so would it be best for American citizens? Yes, but of course, if, or maybe, but if there is, say, then other countries coming in who are dominating and then say, all right, Israel, you're on your own. Good luck out there. So I think all the ramifications of that, I think it's more of just a general political discussion, but in terms of spiral dynamics, I think that's how integral thinking has to happen. We can't simply be like, okay, cool, the green, the US just goes down because they're bad, and then the orange, well, economic power is the most important thing. So I don't know the answers to any of that, but those are just my thoughts.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. I haven't heard Beth.
This has been really great, Darrell. Thanks for bringing a different perspective in for us. So I'm also not an economist. I don't know where all the economists are.
They're not here.
I don't know why we all are here if we're not all economists. Anyways, I think it's a funny disclaimer. So I think they're all like fixing things somewhere else. I want to just reframe everything as we are one species called humanity, and we are very vulnerable. I come from a computer science background. We are all on one data center right now, this little blue planet called Earth. And if we say the good is that the humanity continues as a species, which I know we can all debate if that's even a good thing, but let's just say it is. I think the only measure of success while keeping our humanity is helping us become a multi-planet species. So I think if we can raise all ships and really just like figure out how do we work together to get us to be a multi-planet species and keep our values, which is freedom, having community, being free to love who we want to, being able to have, the ability to sell and make products that we think are fun and other people like. So that's what I would say. So it's just like reframing all of this, like, oh, America, what if America doesn't rule the world? It's like, who cares about America? We're, as a species, we're all together, and either we're going to die together on this little planet or we're going to succeed. So I just want to reframe the whole thing to that question.
Yeah, that's good.
Can I do a party hat reaction to that? Or
yeah,
unless Brandon, you just had a reaction to Bet.
No, my thing was on a different topic, so go ahead.
Well, I'll try to be quick, but Bet, you've been chumming up with Elon, huh? Okay. So, I used to be a big fan of terraforming, and I have books about it, and I'm definitely not against being an interplanetary species eventually, but my only caveat would be that we need to learn how to be a true Earth species first, that we're responsible. We learn what it means to be responsible for this planet before we try to colonize another one. That would be my only caveat, even though I think eventually it would be nice if we could explore the stars. So,
I want to do a party hat on that and say, I want to continue the data center analogy, which I was a data center cloud expert for a long time, is that, yes, you can efficiently run your code on one data center, but if that data center gets hit by a hurricane, it doesn't matter. Like, we are always going to be fixing humanity. Humanity will never be perfect. Let's just be resilient. Let's have a hot backup.
But a caveat on that is, do we have enough energy and to produce ships and material to colonize another planet? I guess. Oh, we'll work out the details, but we'll start a side project on that. Okay, we'll work out the details, guys, and get back to you. All right, Brandon.
Oh, geez, now I want to comment on that because it's interesting. I'll keep it short. Yeah, so I think like the thing about that is like human beings are like hyper adapted to living on Earth. So it's hard for me to imagine we could thrive as well on like any other planet that we potentially discover. But I guess that's like neither here nor there. So I guess like my original point was more just on spiral dynamics itself. And actually, I would be interested to hear your take on this, Darrel, just because you've used the system so much and so extensively. So in my mind, spiral dynamics has been most useful for me as a way to contextualize or like further contextualize other forms of sociological like understanding. I think some of the ways that the system can be misused, and I'm on a sociology forum with some younger people who, like learn a little bit about spiral dynamics and tend to misuse it a little bit in my view, where it can be used as a form of sociological bypassing. Like for example, contextualizing the culture wars that are going on as like blue and green values is very helpful for kind of framing what's going on. But I still think you need to have that like sociological foundation to really understand like what's going on there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the thought, Brandon. I think your idea of using spiral dynamics to contextualize is spot on. And I would, after I comment, I'd love to hear Ben comment on this. He's also experienced using spiral dynamics, has written on it and done a lot of work in that area as well. So contextualizing it is a good way of saying it. And my way of looking at it is, yeah, there are a lot of people who get an appreciation of spiral dynamics and immediately they want to spiral up and more or less get immediately to what they perceive as second tier. When in fact, really their lived experience may not actually be second tier. They may have an insight and an understanding of it, having been exposed to second tier and knowing that, the capacities to deal with everything in second tier is much better. It's just being aware of that is a useful thing. But you're right, there is a surface level understanding that would put someone in the place of misusing, if you could use that term, but I'm not sure that's
yeah, and that's kind of because I understand the model pretty darn well, but I am actually kind of hesitant to introducing it to people for exactly that reason, just because I do know that like it can be kind of misused on like a surface level, which isn't really like a fault of the model, but that's just kind of a thing that happens.
Yeah, what do you, Ben, can you comment on that?
Sure. What is it that you would like me to comment on?
Well, the idea, what he mentioned was that he uses the contextualize and ways and means you would utilize spiral dynamics, for instance, to bring solutions to some of the headier challenges and problems. Like, let's take, for instance, the whole idea behind sustainability goals.
Right.
How could spiral dynamics contribute to solutions in that area?
Right. Well, that's a whole thing. So spiral dynamics is a model, and by definition, all models are wrong. Some are more useful than others. So I always start whenever I talk about spiral dynamics by stating that if we know that all models are wrong, then the question is how useful is a model like spiral dynamics? And I find it extremely useful, but I've also been doing it for 25 years. So it really helps to understand what the model says and especially what the model doesn't say. As people say, it's very easy to misinterpret the model. And so part of what we try to do when we teach spiral dynamics is to actually teach the Graves theory and make it consistent and reliable, that nobody's going to start talking about something that isn't spiral dynamics, but labeling it as spiral dynamics. So I find that for the most part, I don't really talk about spiral dynamics much, except to invite people into the deep dive into it, because if I start talking about it, people generally get glazed eyes and they're not resonant and open to hearing about a model of the evolution of human consciousness. But if they are, then I have an opening and I can start to explain what this model looks like and why I think it's useful. et cetera, et cetera. But otherwise, it's very difficult because you have to meet people where they are. And if they're not really open to understanding a larger frame, like a spiral dynamics integral frame, I don't know how useful it is to start using the language and the colors and everything. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and this could just be a limitation for like the ways that like I communicate with other people. But in my experience, the model is most useful when the person already has some capacity for dialectical forms of thinking, which, that's pretty, I don't know what, maybe, I don't know if rare is the right word, but like that's not something that comes naturally to everybody.
It's an evolutionary stage that one gets to in consciousness, that one is interested, it's salient to them. I don't know whether you've all tripped out on John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis YouTube series.
Absolutely.
That was a real mind blower for me, because it got me to realize that everything that we talk about in spiral dynamics, everything is all about meaning making. And each of the worldviews is actually just a different set of meaning making opportunities that we have kind of coalesced around. We call them colors, we call them worldviews. We've distinguished between the warm colors and the cool colors. That's what Graves really did extremely well. But if it's all meaning making, the place that I get to is, it's part of what I do in my coaching work, is I differentiate between goals being conditional and unconditional goals. And, we talk about, what do we do about the planet? Well, that's pretty much a conditional goal. We don't have a lot of control over what's going to be happening. The question to me is what can I do unconditionally about my situation, whether it's helping myself or the world? And the key piece that I got is that I can be 100% responsible for my own meaning making. So at any given moment, as somebody was saying earlier, my values jump all over the place. Well, it's true. They do. So one, it's useful to appreciate, what value is coming up for me right now? What are my perceptions of my life conditions, and what values am I responding to those perceptions through? And then I always ask myself, is this a healthy expression for me? That's the conscious choice making that to me is the power of something like spiral dynamics, is that I can have 100% responsibility over how I am showing up in a situation, what meaning making I'm bringing to it, and whether it's in that sense a healthy or an unhealthy expression.
Oh, that's very powerful, Ben. Hey, I just learned something that you guys mentioned. What was it? Awakening? What was that series?
Awakening from the Meaning.
Okay, excellent.
It's 50 hours. It's a huge dive, but it's like a master's degree in meaning making.
Excellent. That's great. I always get a nugget here. So we got about 10 minutes left.
Question.
Yeah, wait, Barb, could you hold 1 second? Just let me do a process check. We got about 10 minutes. And so my request is, after Barb's comment, that we go to Paul. Let's, starting with Paul, let's have a rapid round. So try to keep your comments to a tweet size, and then we can get any more fewer thoughts. And normally we end right on time at 9. And if folks want to hang around, we can. I just want to do that process check. Okay, Barb.
Just a follow on. So in terms of language, spiral dynamics language can be not very valuable when you're seeing a conflict, right? But do either of the two of you, when you see conflicts that are clearly, but based on some mimetic differences, do you just articulate what you're seeing without any spiral dynamics, but just have you noticed the difference in your meaning making sort of questions? Do you guys even approach that?
I try not to use, my tendency is not to use spiral dynamics language, because my modus operandi really is always, the spiral is a stealthy practice, in my opinion. Ben?
Unfortunately, I'm not as good at doing that. it's so embedded in me that I kind of once you kind of see the world through a spiral lens, it's really hard to look at it any other way. So I talk about it. Usually if I bring something up with people, it's because they know me well enough and they know enough about my work in spiral dynamics that they can hear, at least when I start mentioning how the colors relate to each other, etc. But I'm not as good as Don about being able to hide it.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we need to find some more of his old videos and watch him in action.
All right, rapid round. Paul.
Okay. Somewhat to address what you was just said, one of the ways that I've been framing it lately is I'm pulling a term. I think that Don used it in some of his work, or some of the people working in the Middle East use it. The social engineer, and it's just like, in order for that's a cell phone. How many? There's billions of them around the planet, billions of them. How many people that own them and use them every day, and it helps or it affects their lives? How many of them have the slightest understanding of the technology, the science, and the systems and the engineering that went into providing this? Probably very few of them. Yet, those scientists, those engineers played an important role in making this happen. I try to think of spiral dynamics and the whole idea of how to make it useful is we're social engineers. We're coming up with social technologies that hopefully at some point will benefit all of humanity.
That's good. Social technology. That's a good way of thinking of it. Right. Rapid round. Any as we draw to the close of the normal time, anybody else burning to say anything?
I'll do a rapid round. I love applying spiral dynamics to all kinds of cool things. And I think something that you mentioned, Darrell, is, we're operating at all different levels, or maybe it was Ben, but I think the holes in our spiral, which is something I'm writing a book about now, that's something we can all pay attention to. I was writing my book and then I realized I had a hole in orange because I became a yoga teacher, and now I'm like very poor. So I'm working on that hole, but I think taking time to use it as a self-development as well as trying to save the world is a useful thing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Beth. Anybody else? Burning desire to say something? I'll say my closing remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Veronica for whatever we do going forward. I will just say that, in my experience working with Ben and Dr. Beck and Saeed and some of the really great folks, it continues to be a wonderful experience. And my idea is that, somewhere along the line, it was said in these interactions with everybody, in spiral dynamics, is that there's nothing as powerful, as a good, methodology. Philosophy, whatever you want to put it, but that helps to explain the world. And I might not be saying it as elegant as I heard it, but essentially, it's a powerful thing when a theory, that's what it was, when a theory help us to understand what's going on around us. And the usefulness to me of spiral dynamics is just that, it's a useful social technology that lends itself to having me gain insight into what is around me. And I may not can express it and explain it all the time, but I'm appreciative of the fact that it helps me look at things with, like when in The Matrix, when Neo, the character, saw the agent Smith for what he really was, just a bunch of digits. And that's kind of how I think spiral dynamics has helped me. And with that's my last word. I'll hang on with everybody after 9, but back to you, Veronica.
Okay. Brandon, did you want to say one last comment before we close?
Oh, sure. So I was actually rereading Sex, Ecology, Spirituality recently. And in the beginning of the book, Ken Wilber says that his book is a book of orienting generalizations. And I think that's actually a very useful way to think of both social psychology and like spiral dynamics as like a model. It's a model of helpful orienting generalizations.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Brandon. And thank you to Darrel for filling in another important piece of the puzzle here with the assimilation contrast effect and stratified democracy. Very interesting insights. I really enjoyed them, and we will be posting this online so that other folks can see this later on. So thanks everybody for being here, and take care.
Thank you.